We had one case where it was here in Arkansas. This guy had money, saw a girl on a CrossFit ad. She's an instructor here, and actually moved from Ohio down here to stalk her just from one picture. So, I mean, there's not much you can do about that.
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers, and last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, and other traumatic events who are ambassadors for these causes to share their lives and the impact they have made. To become a guest on our show, email us at MsUSATexas@gmail.com. If you would like to support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, make a tax-deductible donation to Hope Pyx Global at www.hopyxglobal.org.
Hello, good morning, everyone, or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the 2024 second episode of the TheMsTexasShow, and welcome our special guest, Mr. Kevin Metcalf. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Ellie.
Yes, so Kevin and I met a long time ago online, and we finally met in person last year, and you've done so much work. I asked you to send the bio. I think you're very humble about, just a short paragraph. I see on your social media about 88 trips with them. I'm gonna ask you later on. But your background said you are a former federal agent turned prosecutor and founder of nonprofit serving the most vulnerable. I understand that you have founded, one of the nonprofits is the MVP Task Force. And tell us, how did you get into this work? Tell us about yourself.
That goes back a long way. So I went through basic training for the Army back in 1988. So I've worked in one uniform or another since the late 80s. And of course, the big focus was always on terrorism or drugs or something that guys like me tended to gravitate towards. But I became an only parent when I was working in counterterrorism. I was in federal law enforcement, and I was out of the country a lot. And as an only parent, when your kids are two and 5, and I had two little girls at the time, it's quite an eye-opening experience of what single parents have to go through, especially trying to keep up with the job and trying to keep up with everything. And then on top of that, I decided to leave federal law enforcement and go to law school. So I became a prosecutor, and at that time I'd had well over 20 years in law enforcement, military, and other things. And I was looking for a place where I could add value, where I could contribute as a prosecutor, because while I didn't feel like a new guy, I was the new guy. I was a new prosecutor. And I immediately noticed that, and this is nationwide, state, local, federal level on prosecution, there was always this hesitancy to get involved in digital evidence in social media. So I thought, well, I'll just do that. So I kind of jumped into that, started looking at technology and where technology touches criminal behavior. What does that look like? What do we need to know? And combining investigative background with the prosecution, it really started opening my eyes to what are most vulnerable, our children, our elderly. And it's not just our children and our elderly. You look across anywhere, even seasoned cybersecurity professionals are getting taken by these criminals. Criminals are getting smarter. We're always going to be behind the curve on these people. So just looking at what technology was doing, but especially to our children, I started really focusing all of my efforts on that, where children were involved. So I can't tell you how many times I sat across from a child prepping for a trial, a jury trial, where this child has been raped and abused, and I have to get this child to talk about, whatever it is I need as a prosecutor, or to sit across from these extremely vulnerable people. Not all of them are children. That really opened my eyes to how technology is being used and exploited. It's a double-edged sword. There are a lot of good things technology brings us, but at the same time, there's a lot of bad. So that kind of led me down this path that I'm on. Then I started noticing that technology is advancing so fast that law enforcement really can't keep up on the investigation side. So you're looking at investigative tradecraft. So what I did was started pulling some of the top people I could find together to start really maximizing the experiences that we had. Because most of the time what you'll have is an agency somewhere, an officer somewhere will investigate a case, and over the period of that case, they'll gain experience with, let's say, Google, Snapchat, Facebook, Verizon, T-Mobile, whatever it may be. They'll gain this experience in working with these tech companies, and then they may not do it again for 6 months or a year or whatever it may be. So instead of that, I started getting these volunteers together where we could share and reinvest that experience. So we kept building on that experience. You kept getting the constant exposure to technology, constant exposure to different criminal fact patterns. So all of this, it's kind of like when you're lifting weights, you're working out. The more reps you get, the stronger you get. And that was the case here. So that's how I started up the first nonprofit. It was based on investigative tradecraft. And I got that up to a level where it was running pretty easily. And quite honestly, now you've got Skull Games, you've got Traverse Project, you've got some of these others that are also doing this. They also have built-in investigative tradecraft. So it's getting more and more common out here to have that investigative tradecraft. Now with MVP, I was looking at also the before, during, and after. And I think I talked to you about this. So we have, what I've been involved in is the during part, and I'm still involved in it. So I'm involved. I come in when I need to identify, locate, and rescue a victim or a child, or when we need to identify, locate, and arrest a bad guy. And I always work with law enforcement. I'm not out here kicking these doors as a vigilante anywhere in the world. I'm always supporting law enforcement who has the authority to act. But when you rescue these kids, like when I was in Thailand, I said, we can't go in and, let's say, rescue 10 kids. If we turn around and they say, hey, all we have are resources for 5, then we failed. We didn't really rescue all those kids. We only have resources for 5. What about the ones that are left? So you have to look at the aftercare part. So survivor aftercare, you got to have that. And that is a long-term, that is a long-term commitment. And you've got to have people and organizations that will show up day after day after day. Trauma counseling, job skills, job placement, family care. There's just so much. And then we look at prosecution. So I'm working with amazing prosecutors like David Weiss on human trafficking, Joe Remy on child exploitation, Robert Peters, another amazing prosecutor. So we've got some amazing prosecutors coming together to come in and help make sure that we take that across the finish line, that we not only investigate, rescue, and arrest, but that we also finish that up with prosecution. I'm also on the board of Raven. I'm a founding board member of Raven, and it's a 501c4. So what we're doing is looking at a lot of the laws, and John Pizzurro is doing an amazing job with that, taking a lot of the lessons learned and going back to Congress or these governors and saying, here's the law. This is probably what you intended to happen, but here's what is happening. This is where we're having problems and shortfalls. So trying to take the policy angle to the before side and try to fix some of this. And I also work with NW3C, NCJTC, and some of these other groups where we can take lessons learned. And we take all these lessons learned, instead of just losing them, take those back and teach law enforcement, social workers, school nurses, and community leaders, and all these people. So that was the MVP concept, to hit the before, during, and after. And I'll stop rambling.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you certainly were being very humble with your bio, because I know that you do way more work than what you talk about in the bio. That's why, like, let me just let you introduce yourself. But it's really, I'm continuing to discover like your talents. Like, I found out you went to law school today. That I read on your bio that you're a prosecutor. That's really amazing. What I think really, you do so much, but you are a leader in different areas. And what I want to ask you particularly today, that I think very few or people are not focusing on, is the technology side. You've mentioned that technology is the double-edged sword. You mentioned in your bio about OSINT and about the geospatial mapping and image geolocation and all those fancy words to, the everyday people, like, they were like, what is that? Right? So I would love for you to introduce, because our audience really have like coming from different areas, who may be like professionals who are experts in the area, who are maybe volunteers who are interested and passionate and learning about that, who are just the general public who are learning, say, okay, what can I do to protect our children, and as well as survivors and advocates. So please introduce, us. Maybe we can start with OSINT, the open source intelligence. Tell us about that.
Okay, so open source intelligence. Think about back before computers, back before the internet, back before all of this stuff was going on. Open source intelligence has been around for a very long time. You may have somebody who is on a television show who said something that was broadcast to the public. That's open source. You may have somebody, an interview written up in a newspaper. Maybe they included their address or a phone number or something to that effect. I almost said email, but I was talking about before the internet. So open source could be things like that, something written in a magazine, a newspaper, something that was on a TV show, on an interview, something that appeared in a way that the public could get access to it. So now fast forward to where we are today. I can Google your name and there are articles and pictures everywhere. You're all over the place, Eileen. All of those things I can look at. I can probably look and find your address, your phone number. I can find, well, speaking generally, I can find associates, family members. I can look at your location history. I can probably figure out what kind of vehicles you drive. I can probably tell you your passwords and your password use. I can look back to your life depending on how private you've tried to be, just from open source. And that means it does not require legal process. It does not require special tools necessarily. It's something that I can just go to a keyboard, type in on a computer where I have internet access into Google, and I can start finding a lot of information. Some of the top people out here are like Larry Cameron. I'll just throw him out. So Larry is one of the top OSINT investigators out here. He's an amazing guy. And I've taught with him internationally. We've been on many trips together, done many operations. He was primarily responsible for the rescue of a 13-year-old girl out of Mexico, for that whole operation starting up, because he just wouldn't let up on this case. So that's kind of the power of OSINT, of open source intelligence. And there is a tremendous amount of information out there. And I would urge whoever's listening to this to go to inteltechniques.com and look for their privacy workbook. They have a free privacy workbook. If you want to learn OSINT and you want to protect yourself as much as possible, go through that privacy workbook. You're going to see where you're exposed, and it will walk you through removing your personal information. But at the same time, the more of that you really do, you're also learning how to hunt other people. And that's what one way that OSINT can again, double-edged sword. It's good that we have, it used to be a thing where, hey, you want to come by my house, look me up, I'm in the phone book. Now you don't want your address, you don't want your phone number out here where people would just look it up, but it's still there.
That's really scary, like I have a lot of friends who are doing completely different jobs and going to back to school to learn about cybersecurity. And obviously, I know you and I not taking the high pay and with our passion doing this work. But cybersecurity is becoming like so popular. It applies to everyday life for individuals as well as businesses. How does that connect with human trafficking? And you mentioned about your work with the prosecution with survivors. What does that have to do with this?
Well, so I have to be careful about what we put out in the public space, but when you look at security, it wasn't unusual for a victim to sit across from me in an interview, and I would have her tell me, this guy knows what I'm doing. He knows everything about me. He knows where I go. He knows what I'm doing. So I would pull them up while we're talking, and I would say, "Are these your emails?" I would do my open source. I would say, "Are these your emails?" And she said, "Yeah." And I say, "All right." And then, "Are these your passwords?" And she said, "How did you get that?" And then the next question would be, if you have an iPhone, is this or any combination of these the login to your iCloud, or are any of these the combination to the login to your Google accounts? So bad guys are very, very aware of this. I'm not telling anybody anything new. Bad guys know how to stalk. They know how to do bad things and get away with it. What victims don't spend their time figuring out how to harass and hunt other people. They're always on the defensive. So one of the things we can do is educate people. So sextortion, what we see, the same method I just told you. I can look up your email addresses. I can look up probably your passwords if you're reusing them. That's used in sextortion. So if I see an attractive woman, I'll try to locate her, or attractive girl, I'll try to locate her social media accounts. I'll try to find her emails and passwords, and I'll start logging in. I'll start trying to log into her Snapchat, into her Instagram, into anything where I think she might have inappropriate images stored, into her Google Drive, into her Google Photos, anywhere those images may be. If I'm a bad guy, I'm going to want to log in. So for your listeners here, one of the key things will solve many, many, many problems: password hygiene. Get a password manager. I like Bitwarden. They're 1Pass. There's a lot of good ones out there. The thing is, get it, and that should be the only password that you remember. And when you set it up, use a fresh email. Set up a brand new Gmail, or Proton Mail would be better. And don't use that email anywhere else. Only use it for that password manager. Set up a unique, strong password. You can write it down if you want, for that password manager. And then use that password manager to generate and store unique passwords to all of your accounts. And I've got a kind of a rule where I try to set my passwords at a bare minimum of 23 characters.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so I couldn't tell you. I can tell you one password. That's the one to my password manager. I don't know any other passwords. They're not reused, not recycled. And if your listeners don't do anything else, or don't take anything else away, password hygiene, do this one thing: get a password manager, get a unique single-use email for that password manager, get a unique password that's not used anywhere else, and use it for that password manager, and all the rest of your passwords should be created by that manager.
Yes, I remember having a conversation with one of the IT professionals. They told me, they explained like, how the combinations of the letters. So the more letters, the longer it takes them to crack. But
Right.
still, like, they have like different ways. It definitely, the password hygiene is something that, I was going to ask you about the takeaway. So for the listeners who are listening here, be sure to use this technique and go to the inteltechniques.com and look up the resources. Now, I wanted to ask you more also about the geospatial mapping as well as the image
Okay.
geolocation, and how are you using that in the investigation part?
Well, yeah, I don't want to give away too much, but if you use a cell phone, if you use a mobile device, if you use anything really, it's going to leak location data in one way or another. So we can take that data and actually map it, and we can look for information within that to tell, where people do certain things. So, without getting too far into that. Another thing you can do that, if you follow Benjamin Strick or Carlos Gonzalez, I think, another guy on Twitter or on X, whatever it's called now. If you just check out Benjamin Strick, if you want to see some good examples of geolocation, he is phenomenal, just amazing. So what he does, he takes images and pulls bits of information out of those images and figures out where in the world that picture was taken. And that's pretty simplified, oversimplified way of describing this geolocation aspect.
Yes, I think I heard about this last year. So basically, let's say, correct me if I were wrong. So the understanding is that we suspect a photo of a victim who is, let's say, in a hotel lobby, and then he can identify that particular background where that person is and use that information to help rescue the victim.
Yes, possibly. If you can identify patterns in the environment. And there's a phenomenal tool. It's Deja Vu AI, which is an algorithm. It's a tool that's out here that I'm hoping sees a lot more use in the future, but it does a phenomenal job of identifying even very minute patterns in images.
That's really great. Now, I asked earlier that yesterday I was stalking you. You were talking about stalking. I was swiping on LinkedIn and saw your post about your flight app, 88 countries, and you mentioned about like traveling different places. I haven't used that app, but I love it. It sounds like how many are delayed, and I'm thinking, wow, the airline industry. But regardless, these 88 trips, you working the international space as an international leader, not only as the innovative approaches, but also using the legal approaches. So tell us what you have done in 2023 and what you are doing in 2024.
All right, so 2023 was it was pretty crazy, especially the first 6 months. I was hitting at least 2 or 3 countries a month, and it was very tiring. Changing time zones, and then some of the flights are 14 hours, and there was so much. But when you start looking at some of these countries, and I mentioned this earlier, I only go in and support law enforcement. So there has to be a valid law enforcement entity that we're working with. I don't care which NGO out here or which CIA SEAL team, whatever they've got working for them. We see a lot of this. And Jeff Teagues, Delta Force guy, was Skull Games, phenomenal background. But that's not who he is now. I mean, that's what he did before. But what he's doing now is something that is taking resources and going and hunting bad guys in a new way. But what we like, what a lot of people like to say is, oh, we got all these former CIA, SEAL team, whatever operators, and they're all working with us now. Well, that's great. And those are some great guys. And I still work with them on almost a daily basis. But the public perception of that, I think, is unfair to them. But what was that question, Eileen? I got sidetracked here on the thought process.
So we talked about the 88 countries and what you did in 2023 and what you're doing this year.
So people think that we're going over kicking doors, and I don't care what country you're talking about, that's not going to happen. You're not having a nonprofit going over and kicking doors somewhere. You always have to work with law enforcement. So in a lot of these countries, like Pakistan, for example, they have done an amazing job, really. Syed has really headed up the I'm going blank. His organization there in Pakistan, they have taken the laws, the trafficking in persons laws, and they really integrated it into Pakistan back in 2018, I believe. And that's so vital. You can't go into a country where there are no laws against trafficking or against exploitation, because what are you going to do? There's no structure. There's no way of really carrying out arrests, of doing investigations. There's really no point. Yeah, you can go, maybe you could go in kick doors and rescue some kids or something, but they're not going to stay rescued because there's no legal framework there to take care of them, and there's no legal framework to hold the bad guys accountable. So you're just wasting your time. And quite honestly, the people that you go over to rescue, you're probably causing them more problems than that they were in before. So having said that, when you go into a country, you got to make sure there's a legal framework in place for investigations and for prosecution. And that's what Pakistan is doing right now with trafficking in persons. They're doing a phenomenal job with it. And in a lot of these other countries, you're going in, looking at their system, looking at how they're doing, what they're doing, how they're prosecuting, and trying to help them fine-tune that. So fine-tune the laws, fine-tune the investigative tradecraft, and fine-tune the prosecutorial aspect of it. So that was a lot of the work that was going on in all of those flights. And not all of those were international. There were a lot of them that were domestic too. So I've been all over the United States in 2023. But for 2024, I am going to try to focus more. I want to do less. I want to do fewer trips. Let's say I'm still going to do international work. And I'm doing international work almost every day. I'm consulting. So a lot of these places I've gone to, I'm still actively assisting them with cases. I'm helping them with prosecutions. So that's going to go on, and I'm still going to travel internationally, but I want to look more here in the U.S. I feel like I haven't done enough here in the U.S., especially in this region I'm in, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, in this area, in this region. I really want to step in and do more. I want to work more on the legal framework. I want to work on investigative tradecraft, and I want to strengthen prosecution. And I feel like I owe it to my own region of my own country to spend more time in 2024 here doing that.
Well, if we can clone you, I think we all need you, one of you in each state. I know that you're everywhere, and we definitely could use your help. You mentioned about many plans in different states, including the legal framework. I know that in Texas, it's not the legislative year. So some of you might have watched our first episode this year. And since it's like Human Trafficking Awareness Month, I wanted to see, obviously we're talking about human trafficking matters. Regarding the legal framework, do you have any plans, maybe proposing some kind of policies, and if you can share?
Well, there's a lot to that. I'm still shocked that we do not have more states that have banned child sex dolls. And that is one thing that I thought would just go like wildfire across the country. And so far, I haven't looked lately, but my memory seems to be that there are 4 states, maybe 5 states in the United States that have banned the purchase of child sex dolls, that have made it illegal. I don't know if you've seen those things, but even up close, I mean, they are hyper realistic. They are children, and they are made for sexual pleasure. And I don't see how any state in this country could be okay with people ordering that. Now, there is some group out here saying, oh, if you let these predators order these sex dolls, it's going to make our kids safer. I think that's just crap. I don't think there's any validity to that whatsoever. I think that's something that they just try to make sound good, but I just think it's a load of crap.
It's funny that you mentioned that as the holidays and there are sales, and I accidentally ran into one of the stores, not to mention the name by itself, but I'm noticing like they're having those very sexy wear for children at the clothing stores, and we're sitting there thinking, I'm talking to one of the people that I work with, we're saying like, okay, these people have, the size, clearly those children haven't really hit puberty. And why are you even designing this kind of adult clothes for those children? And you mentioned about the sex dolls, and I forgot what was the brand. it just skipped my brain right now, but there was a brand last year that was all over social media, and they took all the pictures of they had children who were holding dolls but wearing
yeah.
all the bandages and everything. So
Right.
yes, I'm you can count on me on supporting you with this effort for sure. But yes, you're doing great work. I can't wait to see the more work that you will be doing in 2024. Now I understand that you're doing so many things. Are there any announcement, like in addition to the work that you're consulting with the different law enforcement and or different states and agencies? Are there any public speaking events and or other opportunities that the general public can participate?
I think I'll be, let's see, next week I'll be in Little Rock. We've got 4 states coming together to do some counter human trafficking training. And we've got some other things that I don't want to put out there just yet that we're working on. The 19th, I think 19th through 21, Oxford, Alabama is the next Skull Games event. I'll be there for that with Jeff Teagues, Joe Scaramucci, and their crew. They do some phenomenal work. Right after that, I think the 22nd and 23rd, I'll be at Lake Charles, Louisiana for the Mid-South Human Trafficking Conference there. I'm doing a lunch and learn for UPS and Truckers Against Trafficking on the 24th. That's going to be a webinar. And that's all I can remember right now. I may have some more stuff. That's for January.
Yes,
I think I'm staying in the country until around March. I think I may head back to Interpol in March, and then I've got some stuff going on in the UK in April. But
that's a lot. That's a lot. I can imagine that you need an assistant definitely to manage your calendar and everything. I'm getting out of control with my calendar and having multiple ones and how to sync that. Definitely looking for software that can help with that. Now, you mentioned about takeaways about password hygiene. Before I let you go, is there any other takeaways you would like to leave with our audience before I let you go?
Well, I think the big one is the password hygiene. That'll take care of a lot of problems. And be careful what you're posting online. I know people hear this over and over and over again, but you got to be careful what you post online. We had one case where it was here in Arkansas. This guy had money, saw a girl on a CrossFit ad. She's an instructor here, and actually moved from Ohio down here to stalk her just from one picture. So, I mean, there's not much you can do about that, but just be careful what you post online. Make sure you're not recycling any passwords. And the inteltechniques.com, if you go on there and get that workbook on removing yourself from online, I think it's well worth the effort. You're going to learn some OSINT, but at the same time, you're going to learn where you're exposed, what information is out there, and how to protect yourself.
That is very helpful. I think, in this episode, we talked about so much about the great work that you're doing, educating our audience about the open source intelligence, about the geomapping, etc., and about your 2024 plan. It sounds like you are a person of multiple talents. We certainly would love to bring you back on in the future to give us updates and about more of the work that you do. But thank you so much, Kevin. And you're watching the MsTexas show, and our guest today is Kevin Metcalf, and we look forward to seeing you at the next episode.